Looks like a limited edition accessory. Why does my younger sister-in-law have something like this? More importantly, respect your own sister over some other woman, you stupid brother. On the day of the wedding, during the spare time before the ceremony, I tried to calm my nerves by watching my cat through a pet camera. However, what the pet camera showed was not my beloved cat, but my dolled-up sister-in-law, who was attending our wedding. Unaware of the pet camera in the room, she was freely rummaging through my personal belongings. When I showed this to my husband, he blew up like a hot water heater and charged into the room where his relatives were waiting. Broadcasting the live footage to the entire family, my sister-in-law was caught humming a tune while voicing her grievances about my husband and trying on my personal items. Upon seeing her outrageous behavior, my in-laws turned pale and rushed out in a hurry. Minutes later, a devastating comeuppance was in store for my sister-in-law, who thought she had not been caught and took bold actions. I have been working at the company I joined in my final year of university for 3 years. About 2 years after I started working, a male colleague, whom I began to regard as more than a friend, confessed his desire for a serious relationship with the intent of marriage. I accepted his proposal without hesitation. A year has passed since then, and we are now in full swing preparing for marriage. Our new home is located not far from my in-laws' place, and with the pretext of a wedding gift, both our parents contributed little by little, and we bought a pre-owned single-family home. The remaining amount of the purchase price was covered by a mortgage, but since both my husband and in-laws agreed I should keep working post-marriage, we were optimistic that working together would allow us to pay it off sooner. There was a reason for choosing a single-family home. I have an extraordinary love for cats, and I lived surrounded by several cats at my parents' home. When I decided to attend a university in another state and had to live alone, of course I never considered parting from my cats. My parents strongly opposed me taking a cat with me to live alone, but I persuaded them by saying I would work part-time and take responsibility for it. In the end, I was only able to bring one cat from my parents' home, but I pride myself on not letting my cat feel deprived while I balanced my studies and part-time work. After graduation, I continued to live in the same pet-friendly apartment, but post-marriage, it was undeniable that the apartment was too small. I was very sad at the thought of possibly having to return my cat to my parents' house. To me, cats are almost like soulmates. Having my dear cat with me has allowed me to endure tough exams and overcome the loneliness of living alone for the first time. My husband was aware of my passion for cats even before we started dating, so he was okay with keeping a cat. However, it was challenging to find a pet-friendly apartment or condo. Finding a small space suitable for a single person wasn't too hard, but considering 2 adults and the possibility of children in the future, along with rent considerations, the search was proving difficult. One day, when we went to my in-laws' house for wedding introductions, I hit it off with my mother-in-law over our love of cats. My mother-in-law, though an in-law herself, was a local like my in-laws, so I thought she might have information on pet-friendly rentals and consulted with her. She was thrilled at the prospect of living with a cat and suggested with much excitement, "Why don't you just buy a single-family home?" As it turns out, my mother-in-law loves cats and lived with them before marrying, but had to give up cohabiting with them after discovering my father-in-law's cat allergy. With this background, and perhaps feeling a bit guilty, my father-in-law didn't argue against the idea and decided to help fund our home purchase. It didn't seem fair to rely only on my in-laws, so when I explained the situation to my parents, they offered to help for the sake of the cat. My father kept insisting it was strictly for the cat's benefit, but my mother told me, "He's just shy. Don't worry about it. It is a wedding gift," and shared a knowing smile. My dad has always been shy about expressing his true feelings, and it's not like he needed to be shy at a time like this, so my mother and I couldn't help but laugh together. Thus, with the help of our parents, we were able to settle on our new home much sooner than expected, and we decided to move before the wedding. My mother-in-law, who adores cats, is still in her youthful 50s. She works part-time on some days, takes up hobbies, and like clockwork, rejuvenates herself monthly at a cat cafe. Seeing how she's that kind of person, I thought our cat would warm up to her in no time. So I quickly invited her over to our new place, and to my surprise, our cat took to her more than I imagined, and she seemed to have a blast. Ever since then, she's been visiting frequently, not just to play with the cat, but also to share long-lasting recipes and secretly spill the beans on my husband's favorite dishes. She really goes out of her way, and it has made my relationship with her very good. My husband and I are already living together in our new home, so it feels like married life has already started, even though the wedding is still ahead. We work at the same company, but once our marriage was decided, my husband got transferred to another department. It seems he had already requested a transfer, so he's pretty pumped about moving to the department he wanted. Our work start times are the same, but we come home at different hours. Whoever gets home first starts preparing dinner, and I think we're doing quite well at splitting the household chores. During the commute, my husband often reads the newspaper because of his job, while I've made it a routine to check on our cat through the pet camera I installed at home. Even in the crowded train, getting soothed by my cat cuts my stress in half. It's just one good thing after another. The conversation might jump around a bit, but when I went to my husband's family home to formally introduce myself, the in-laws weren't the only ones I met for the first time. I had heard about his unmarried sister since we started dating. My sister-in-law is quite the free spirit, with a passion for international travel. Instead of holding down a regular job, she does various part-time gigs to save up for her trips. It seems like she's living the dream. I always thought it was great to have passions, and people with their own interests tend to respect each other and get along just fine. So her not having a 9-to-5 job or being spontaneous wasn't a big deal to me. Truth be told, my own decision to work full-time was largely to maintain a lifestyle surrounded by cats. And the appeal of having paid leave in case something happened to them was not lost on me. You don't usually get that with part-time jobs. I'm pretty keen on traveling myself. Back when I lived at home, I went on a few international family trips. Learning about unknown worlds is always a plus, and I figured I'd get along with my sister-in-law just fine. My husband, however, gave me an earful about how naive my thinking was. He vented about all the troubles he's had because of her, like how his money would magically shrink or how she'd dip into the savings he'd built up from his own part-time work. Thinking his piggy bank was too vulnerable, he had his parents set him up with his own bank account. But even then, it seemed she'd somehow withdraw from it without his consent. Back in the day, he used easy-to-remember pins, which pretty much gave her free rein. He said it felt just like being robbed. He was pretty steamed up, maybe reliving those emotions, because she also had a habit of using and breaking his stuff without asking. They seemed to be on pretty bad terms. There didn't seem to be any lies in my husband's side of the story, and it didn't sound exaggerated. But I didn't want to take sides and sour my relationship with my sister-in-law before it even started. While I nodded along with my husband inside, I was reminding myself to stay neutral. But boy, the sister-in-law I met was nothing like the picture my husband painted. She was something else entirely. After the introductions and self-introductions were done, and we began to dig deeper over dinner with the in-laws, she started talking about her hobbies and was super easy to talk to. Despite the friction with my husband, I felt that, as a fellow woman, we could make it work. She's in her early 30s, but seems to see the world through rose-colored glasses. Probably due to her carefree lifestyle. Then again, some people don't show their true selves and put on a facade. Was she on guard around me? Or was she playing up the unreliable angle out of consideration? That's what I was thinking. However, as the warm and friendly atmosphere of the gathering reached its later stages, my in-laws formally addressed the start of our family relations with words of encouragement. My mother-in-law, drawing from her experience, mentioned that it's tough to balance work and unfamiliar household chores, so she encouraged us to support each other. Ever since my husband decided to support my career continuation, he confidently assured that he could handle the household chores, having learned the ropes from his mother, who in turn was a bit worried and asked, "Really? If you ever need anything, don't hesitate to ask," they said, and the meet and greet for our wedding should have ended on a good note. That is, until my sister-in-law, oblivious to the mood, chimed in. Both of you working means you'll be rolling in dough, right? You'll be saving up for a rainy day, huh? If I end up single and an old lady, you'll use that savings to take care of me, right? So if I never marry, you guys have got my back, she said. The idea was that we should manage on my husband's salary alone and save my entire paycheck so that if my sister-in-law never married and became elderly, we would use that money to support her. I was stunned. It took me a moment to comprehend what she had said, and I was at a loss for words. But my husband instantly got it. Are you kidding me? Why should we care about your retirement when you've chosen to live your life without planning for it? He snapped back. He made it clear that her disrespectful comment was none of our business, and firmly put her in her place. The in-laws, too, were too flustered to laugh off such a remark and sent her out of the room, apologizing to us for her rudeness. After this incident, I consciously avoided any interaction with my sister-in-law. I believe everyone is free to choose their own path in life. But who would ask someone they've only met for a few hours to take care of them in their old age? Considering what my husband told me about his sister using his money and wages from his part-time jobs at will, I now felt she was targeting my income. She seemed all too eager to come to us with her hands out, and I couldn't bring myself to like her. She easily trampled over my intention to bridge the gap and get along well. Even if she said it was just a joke to lighten the mood, the atmosphere had already been pleasant, and such a tasteless joke isn't funny. She was just an immature child who couldn't read the room. Even after her outrageous outburst, I arranged to visit my in-laws' home when I knew my sister-in-law would be out working part-time. Thus, from the time of our initial meeting until the day of our wedding, I never saw her face again. Until the very end. My husband refused to let his sister attend the wedding. I understood his feelings, as I too didn't want any strange outbursts or behavior at our wedding. However, I was worried about what she might do if she wasn't invited, so I convinced my husband that it would be better to have her there under someone's watchful eye. He reluctantly agreed to my suggestion. Frankly, I was also nervous about what she might do in front of my parents, relatives, and friends. The in-laws said they would keep a close eye on her, so I had to trust that. But my sister-in-law managed to mess everything up with her outrageous actions. It wasn't just about us anymore. She had created a situation that involved the in-laws and all the relatives. After my husband and I arrived at the venue and changed in our respective dressing rooms, he came to mine. He was wearing a light-colored vest and morning suit, while I wore a white wedding dress that showed off my shoulders and back. The dress and veil were too long for me to move around on my own. It would have been selfish of me to ask him to stay because I felt lonely, since he had greetings to make with his work colleagues. So I was really happy when he came to my dressing room. The time until the start of the wedding ceremony also served as a solid time filler for me. It's not just about killing time, it has become a part of my daily routine. That meant checking on our beloved cat through the pet camera and getting that warm, fuzzy feeling. When my husband came in, I was just about to look through the camera on my phone. He had become quite the cat lover since we started living with one. Do you want to watch together? I asked and he told me to go ahead. Apparently, he wasn't used to wearing the morning suit, and it seemed like that was the least of his concerns. Taking advantage of my husband's kindness, I peeked into the pet camera, but what was displayed was not my beloved cat, but my sister-in-law. We had received a message from my mother-in-law while we were on our way to the venue. The gist of it was that she was going to bring my sister-in-law to the venue now. We had agreed to keep each other posted so my sister-in-law wouldn't cause trouble for other guests. My mother-in-law had assured us that since they were driving, there would be no unsupervised actions, so we were at ease. But what was this all about? I called out to my husband loudly. At that moment, still unaware of the gravity of the situation, my husband naively remarked that I didn't need to shout to be heard. But he was speechless after seeing the live feed from the pet camera. Uncharacteristically, he let out a few expletives. It was clear his anger was too intense to contain. Then he spun on his heel and stormed out of the dressing room. I followed him in a hurry. Considering I was likely to trip in my heels, I kicked them off. Even if it looked undignified, I took off the meticulously set veil and boldly lifted the hem of my dress to run. My husband headed straight into the family's waiting room to provide the out-of-town family with a comfortable place to rest instead of the usual waiting room. A room spacious enough for a small banquet had been prepared. Thanks to its size, the room came equipped with a large screen. When I caught up to my husband, the entire family was taken aback, not understanding his actions. He was saying something to his parents, but his anger was so intense that the subject of his sentences was missing. Noticing that I had caught up, he asked to borrow my smartphone. Using my phone, he projected the live feed from the pet camera onto the big screen and turned up the volume so everyone in the room could hear. The screen showed my sister-in-law humming a tune while rummaging around the room. At first, my husband's relatives thought it was some kind of skit and watched her behavior with dismay. There were even some murmurs of exasperation about how she had always been one to do outrageous things. But when my sister-in-law began to rant about my husband to the tune of her humming, the atmosphere in the room turned icy. "He's shutting out his own sister. What's up with that guy?" she said. "Having tea with my sister-in-law isn't such a big deal, right?" Of course, my gainfully employed sister-in-law also chimed in. "Remember when my brother gave his wife that fancy engagement ring? And sometimes he buys trendy jewelry. I bet that was all for me." Muttering to herself that I shouldn't need the accessories I used to wear when I was single, my sister-in-law meticulously rummaged through my dresser. She even said she'd sell anything that didn't suit her or looked valuable. I had given my mother-in-law a spare key so she could play with the cat anytime. Knowing this, my sister-in-law, who had been banned from our house, took advantage of my mother-in-law's absence during the wedding to sneak in and look for valuables. Upon understanding the situation, my in-laws immediately stood up, their faces pale, and apologized to me. When we arrived at the venue, my sister-in-law excused herself to use the restroom. Regardless of whether she needed to be watched all the way to the restroom, one would think that if you bring someone to a venue, they would behave. My husband and I, along with my in-laws, never thought my sister-in-law would do something so drastic as to sneak into our house and commit theft on the very day of her own brother's wedding. We had assumed we would be notified when she arrived. Who would have thought that she would stoop so low? My in-laws apologized again, emphasizing that stopping my sister-in-law's actions was the priority. With that, my father-in-law sprinted out of the waiting room, followed by my mother-in-law. The relatives on my husband's side seemed unable to grasp the situation. Perhaps they were struggling to organize their feelings, terrified that a family member could do such a thing, terrified that a criminal might emerge from the family, oblivious to the relatives' awareness. My sister-in-law, upon finding branded accessories in my dresser, tried them on, checking herself in the mirror with a satisfied smile and even checking their resale value on her phone. The relatives in the waiting room began to grumble complaints about my sister-in-law's behavior and their growing distrust towards the in-laws who had raised her. They questioned her upbringing, suggesting that being a freeloader and single past 30 led to this behavior. Regarding this, I think it's questionable whether my husband should apologize. From the beginning, he doesn't care about the opinions of relatives, and it seems he is thinking about how to make his sister atone for her foolish actions. I could tell he was desperately trying to control his anger as he clenched his fist over and over. I felt anger and disbelief, but I was convinced that my sister-in-law and I were fundamentally different people. Talking to a person like her is just a waste of time. Even if she suffers a setback, she'll just sleep it off and completely forget about it by the next day. She doesn't learn from her mistakes nor have any intention of growing. She's nothing but the dregs of society, only capable of thinking about how to get through life the easy way. I swore that even if my husband or in-laws groveled and begged me for forgiveness, I would never let her in. But I doubt my husband would want that anyway. About 10 minutes after the in-laws had stormed out, the live video took a dramatic turn. As my sister-in-law was engrossed in her search, my father-in-law lunged into the room. Before she could turn around at the sound of the door swinging open, she was suddenly grabbed from behind, completely taken aback. "What are you doing here in my son and daughter-in-law's home, which you're banned from?" Her face was clearly shaken. Our new home wasn't equipped with security measures. It seemed like she had done her homework, knowing this. She must have found a way to snoop around without the in-laws' watchful eyes, knowing well enough that my mother-in-law had a spare key. But it looked like she hadn't thought about what would happen if she got caught. She was stumbling over her words, trying to make excuses. I was asked by my sister-in-law. Look, I even found the jewelry as proof, right? Then, trailing behind, my mother-in-law entered the room. Holding a smartphone, she loudly exclaimed that she had to report the illegal entry to the police. "Why would I ask you, someone who's banned? And why are you wearing the jewelry that you claim she asked for?" My sister-in-law's weak excuses were met with solid arguments from my mother-in-law, and as she looked for a chance to escape, my father-in-law pinned her down with his full weight. She was complaining that she was in pain, that she would suffocate to death, but my father-in-law firmly told her that if she had the strength to break into our home, she should have the strength to face the consequences. Strength to shout she wasn't gonna die. Right then, the police arrived, having been notified. My sister-in-law was taken away as a trespasser, but she kept resisting, repeating, "Just because I entered a family member's home, that's trespassing. Are the police here idiots?" My mother-in-law informed her that all the evidence was there, and that the entire family had seen it happen in real time, revealing the existence of the pet camera. When my sister-in-law saw the bedroom camera, she seemed to admit her defeat, and was quietly led away by the police. I breathed a sigh of relief at that sight. I hadn't thought the in-laws would hand her over to the police, but I was grateful that they imposed a proper sanction. Yet, the fact that the criminal act of a real sister was exposed made it complicated to feel simply happy about it. Even if they hated each other and didn't get along, they were still siblings. And I believed that he must have his own thoughts about it. The relatives' room on my husband's side was in uproar. To think that a criminal had emerged from the family, some were disappointed, while others openly expressed their anger as a disgrace to the family. Amidst this, the in-laws who had handed my sister-in-law over to the police returned. Naturally, the wedding could not proceed under these circumstances and was, of course, cancelled. There were people who had traveled long distances to celebrate with us, and others who had finally managed to clear their schedules to be there. Feelings of regret and a wish for understanding intermingled within me. My in-laws quickly sensed how I felt and repeatedly bowed their heads to us, apologizing for the turn of events. The mother-in-law blamed herself for not keeping a better eye on her daughter, apologizing to us repeatedly. She also stood silently, taking in the furious remarks from the entire family for having brought such a disgrace upon them, and kept apologizing endlessly. Having heard that the groom's side was in chaos, my parents worried, peeked into the room, and seeing the in-laws apologizing to the groom's family, they realized something was seriously wrong and asked me for an explanation. I could say that my sister-in-law had broken into our new home to steal, but I didn't know how much they would believe. Then, noticing my parents were there, my in-laws came over and, without any explanation, apologized to my parents. When the in-laws revealed what their daughter had done, my parents' expressions grew complicated. My husband knew his sister had issues, but he had no idea she was this foolish. Along with his parents, he apologized to mine. Despite him being a victim too, neither my parents nor I could simply say, "Don't worry about it," and a heavy, indescribable silence hung in the air. After gathering their thoughts, my parents said they would leave future decisions up to us, but they did agree to cancel the wedding, and for the time being, that settled things. Later on, my sister-in-law received only a fine as punishment because it was her first offense, and she had not actually stolen anything. If she had been caught after rummaging through the new house, theft would have been added to her charges, and she would not have been let off with just a fine. My husband bitterly stated that she should have been arrested for theft and served time in jail. I somewhat agreed, not wanting to have any involvement with her in the future. Despite receiving only a fine, my sister-in-law now had a criminal record, and she was severely scolded by my in-laws for breaking into someone's house while they were away, even though she was family. My father-in-law was so angry that I thought his veins might burst, and I heard that he disowned her on the spot. She had to cover all the expenses related to the wedding, including those incurred from the cancellation. My sister-in-law, who had spent all her earnings from her part-time job, was forced to borrow money from various lenders to cover the costs. Some of these lenders were reputable, while others were shady and skirted the edges of the law. Now she faced a future of hard work and being constantly pursued by debt collectors. Unable to come to terms with what had happened, my sister-in-law turned to social media to vent her frustrations and seek validation. However, instead, she sparked a firestorm of criticism. Her photo, real name, and criminal record were spread all over the internet, and a simple search would bring up all these details. Even though she later deleted her posts, someone had saved the logs, and her rants never truly disappeared from the internet. Whenever she created new social media accounts, she was quickly discovered, ensuring that her criminal past would always follow her. She was fired from her previous part-time job because having a criminal record could damage the establishment's reputation. And she was let go from other jobs after her co-workers found out about her infamy. Currently, she is barely getting by, working physically demanding jobs like construction just to make her debt payments. It is said that she can no longer pursue her hobby of traveling abroad. After everything had calmed down, we had a small and intimate wedding with only close friends and family. It was a DIY wedding with the help of colleagues and friends, but it was filled with love and will be a cherished memory for life. We have also adopted a new cat and are spending our happy days surrounded by our furry friend and kind-hearted people.